cares. That specifically our great God in heaven cares. The prophet reminds us that no suffering goes unnoticed. But also, not just unnoticed, but no suffering is beyond the redemption of God. The prophet reminds us that no prayers go unanswered, but instead God acts in every situation and gives the gift of a Savior. As we move into the gospel lesson, we're reminded that indeed Jesus has come into the world. We're reminded in this section that Jesus sees those people who are suffering. His heart always in his life and his ministry is with the suffering, with the people who experience the greatest limitation in their lives. His heart is always with people who, because of the infirmities, because of the things that have happened to them, they're out there kind of living on the fringes of society. We can remember some of those beautiful stories in Jesus' life and ministry. We can remember people like the woman who has the issue of blood, who desires only to get close enough to just touch the fringe of Jesus' clothing, and she believes that she'll be made whole. We remember another woman, a woman bent over, some infirmity from her earlier days in life that has caused her to be bent over to the point that she cannot see into the face of anyone around her. Remember stories about people who are possessed by demons, who have had something take over their lives to such an extent that they cannot think or act in the usual kind of ways any longer. We can think about a man who has been lame from his earliest days, who's never been able to take a single step. These are precisely the people who claimed Jesus' attention, who became the very focus of his ministry. Note the beginning in this Matthew passage, though. Note how he starts out with a little bit of a detail about John. John, who is the precursor of Jesus, the one who is supposed to announce and prepare the way for Jesus. We could just slide right by that little detail. But it gives us a detail about where John is at the time for this question that is posed to Jesus. It tells us that John is in prison. And so he has a question for Jesus, but because he's in prison, he's unable to ask it for himself, so the disciples come to ask Jesus the question, "Are you the long-awaited Messiah?" Is the kind of implication behind the question he asks, or are we still to wait? Are you the long-awaited Messiah, or are we still to wait? I don't know about you, but when I read Bible passages, sometimes I find things in there that rattle me a little bit, and they catch me a little bit off guard. And so I find myself responding that way to this question coming from John to Jesus. John, the baptizer, the one who has this tremendous role to play in the life and ministry of Jesus. He is the one sending messengers to ask the question of Jesus. On the one hand, it seems a little embarrassing to me to have a great pillar of faith to be asking a question. Because after all, don't we get those messages in life that we're never to doubt? That we're never, ever to waver in our faith? And yet, here is John asking the question. When, though, is it that doubts tend to arise in our lives? Do they arise in the good times? When everything is going our way, when we feel like we've got the world by a string? Nope. Not when it happens. Instead, doubts begin to arise when things are not going well. When our situation, whatever place we find ourselves in life, is not what we ever would have imagined for ourselves. Doubts arise when we find ourselves being done in by other people, taken advantage of, or facing horrible, awful experiences because of the evil that someone else has inflicted in life. I imagine that John would never have imagined having to deal with being an innocent man, but dealing with the suffering and humiliation of prison life. I kind of imagine that he never would have imagined the possibility of losing his very own life at the hand of another person. But here he is, chapter 11, Gospel of Matthew, in precisely that circumstance of life. It causes questions to arise. And so he sends the messengers ahead. Does Jesus answer directly?